Baking bread. When I was a boy between the ages of, let's say 5 and 8, I went every summer to visit my brother, George, and his wife, Ellen. George was a Lutheran pastor in Humboldt, South Dakota, and I spent about 6 weeks every summer there for a few years. Humboldt is a small farming town, a typical South Dakota farming town, maybe 300 people, farms all around it, and inside the town there was a Catholic church across the street from a Lutheran church. There was a big granary, which was really the biggest deal in town, big, huge granary. And then there was I remember a hardware store, a cafe, and there probably was a bar, but I wasn't paying attention as a kid. And then there was a little service station for gas and that sort of thing. And it was just a fun place for a little guy to hang out and go to the farms and this and that. And I was proud of my brother, the preacher, and this type of thing. It was all good. But one of the great memories I had was when my sister-in-law, Ellen, would bake bread. That's the way we had bread. You didn't go to the store to buy it. She baked white bread. And what I remember about it is the aroma. The beautiful aroma of baking bread. I had never smelt it before. I mean, I lived in Detroit. We just went up to Wrigley's and bought a loaf of Wonder Bread or something. But the baking bread, and it would just fill your soul. There's something about that. And thinking about that aroma of baking bread and seeing Jesus as the bread of life, that all sort of makes sense in an interesting way. Years later, I had another incident with bread in my life. My brother-in-law, Dick, Richard Malash, he drove a Pepperidge Farm bread truck. And he owned the route and that type of thing. Well, it was holiday seasons, and I was in college, and it got really, really busy. And he said, "Mark, would you work some shifts with me on the truck to help out?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got time to do it. That'd be no problem." Problem was that once I got in that truck, I wasn't used to being in a bread truck, and I wasn't used to negotiating the wonderful aroma of all this bread. And even back then, they had all different kinds of breads, different. And I would say to Dick, I said, "Can I try this bread and this bread and this bread?" And my brother-in-law was a total pushover. I think I opened 4 or 5, 6 loaves of bread. And so in our family lore, it was the situation where when Mark helped Dick on the bread route, he ate all the profits. And, but it was a great thing. Well, I'm going to keep on bread for a minute here. Now, interestingly enough, these are fun facts. Fun facts. Did you know that the people of Turkey, the country Turkey, consume the most bread in the world per capita, number of pounds per year per person? It's a crazy number, 440 pounds of bread per year per person in Turkey, more than a pound a day. So I wondered, I said, boy, that's something. How much do we consume in the United States? And well, I found out we consume 53 pounds of bread per day. And then I just wondered about, boy, the contrast is really weird. I wonder what the average life expectancy is in Turkey versus the United States. And to my surprise, the life expectancy in Turkey is 79. And in the United States, it's 78. So there must be something to this bread of life thing. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. But in any event, the people today in our lesson are people that are very much interested in bread and being filled and having all that they need to live their life. These are the people who were in last week's story, the feeding of the 5,000, the fishes and the loaves. And of course, if you remember, they wanted Jesus to become a king, And Jesus moved away from him. He said, I'm not going to be a king, not the way you think of each other. I mean, Jesus was a pacifist. I'm not going to overtake Rome and do all that sort of thing. And so he tried to get away from the people. And finally he does, but they find him. They're very intent. They are very enthusiastic about Jesus and his ministry. And today we finally see these same people catching up with him. And Jesus, of course, he says, you know, I know why you're here. You want more bread to eat. But he said, really, what I'm doing, the ministry that I have goes beyond the bounds of simply having enough bread. It's all about sharing the peace that surpasses all understanding. The bread for Jesus, again, always is shalom, compassion, mercy, justice, forgiveness, grace. This is the bread of life that comes from God to God's people, and then it's God's people that transition these statements of love and hope to the rest of the world, and then we start to see things develop. And this is what you need to do, because people say, well, we want this bread. Well, Jesus says what? He says, follow me. If you want the bread of life, if you want to perform works of God, miracles, if you will, you must follow me. You must listen to me, watch what I'm doing, and start to follow my footsteps. And if you do, there will be an abundance that naturally will take place. But it's up to you to make that decision. But with you, this can, in fact, happen. Some of the people decided to do it and others didn't, but last week I invited you to think about the idea of how do we make this bread in our lives today? How do we follow Jesus today and become that bread of life and to experience the fullness of God's love in our lives and to share it with others? And I said, I invited you to put on the eyes of Jesus, right? How does Jesus see the world? If you were Jesus, what are the lenses that he is looking through? What is he paying attention to? And I suggested he is paying attention to shalom. He's looking at the life. He's looking at the world around him. He's paying attention to when compassion is needed. He's paying attention to when justice is needed. He's paying attention to when forgiveness is needed and when mercy or grace is needed. He is looking at God's creation, loving God's creation, recognizing that all of us, all people throughout the world, are profoundly and overwhelmingly sacred. And because of their sacred nature, we have been given the opportunity, through our belief in Jesus Christ, to extend God's love to the world to the best of our ability. It starts in our homes and goes to our neighborhoods, and we keep working and working, and we go out and out and out. Now, what I suggested last week was that to do this, to put on the eyes of Christ, we must be aware of our lives, the world in which we live, and those things that kind of can keep us from focusing first on the shalom. I suggested that nationalism is very big in the air today, and that is a force that can crowd out shalom. It is not akin to shalom, but a lot of people can be swept up in it. People can be swept up in Wall Street economics in the sense of just totally focused on the best return on investment and all these types of things, and get so absorbed in it that it crowds out the shalom, see. People can get absorbed in political matters, whether they be Republicans or Democrats, conservatives or liberals. They can get so wrapped up in some sort of a school of thought that, again, shalom is unintentionally crowded out. And the same thing with cultural expression. Cultural expression can be an adaptation of all these things, but we can get so absorbed that maybe it crowds shalom out. And so what I suggested was to attempt to let that stuff go, to have a type of a fast for about a month. Let it all go. Just push it out, and then work at putting the eyes of Jesus on, focusing on shalom, and starting to see the world this way. And see what happens. I suggested last week that you focus on forgiveness. So many dimensions of shalom. So practice letting it all go. Focus on forgiveness. How many people did that? There's more than some, I'm sure you did that, but it's not a test. But that's something that we can do. We can focus on forgiveness. We can work on forgiveness. We can pay attention to it, because as we build those muscles, it has an impact on how we see the rest of the world. And now, this week, I'm going to invite you to focus on compassion, another dimension of shalom. Compassion is where we identify and we see pain and suffering. We could start with our own pain and suffering. Sometimes we even deny our own pain and suffering. It could move into our household, it could go into the community, and so on. But to be aware, to not run away from it, to actually see it, to understand it, to pay attention to it, to not pass it by like the Pharisees and the priests did in the parable of the Good Samaritan, but to actually get engaged, to become aware, and to allow our hearts and our minds to start to become one with those who are hurting. It's something we can focus on. It's something that our culture doesn't necessarily celebrate and go, boy, oh boy, let's focus on pain and suffering. But it is the way of shalom. Who in your life is hurting right now? Might be you. It might be a spouse, a neighbor, a friend. How can you reach out? When you say, how are you, do you mean it? There's two how are yous, isn't there? There's the how are you, or there's the real how are you? An invitation to talk, to open up. One of the greatest gifts we can give each other and the world around us is a listening ear. Just to listen, to affirm, to acknowledge. There's so much in our life that God can work with and work on if we allow this shalom to work through us. I'm going to be talking more and more coming up as we move into the fall again about people who have been abandoned in nursing homes, who have no one, who desperately need someone to talk to. It's a huge mission field for us and for the church to be there for people in their hour of need and to get to know them and to let them tell us their stories. All kinds of different ways we can identify and share God's love with the world. So as we think about this daily bread and how this daily bread moves forward in time and space, we recognize, in the end, it's pretty much up to us. It's our time. It's our life. These are the days that we have been given to spend on planet Earth. This is the faith we've been given, something that far transcends a lot of the noise that is about us. And as we allow the fragrance of the gift of life to work through us, maybe we'll have some sort of an influence on all the other stuff as well. The good news, in the end, is that we have been given the freedom to make those choices. And we've been given the faith follow it through. Amen.